It's over. There we go.
Okay, so I go to Chesapeake Bay Academy for my internship, and I was with the middle level students, so they're like 9, maybe 12. And I think it's a really good age because elementary school, I feel like it's like kind of hard to like get through them if they're having some like mental or disability. But in the upper level, I feel that they are too advanced, not too advanced, but I want to have like a really big impact on them. So if they are struggling that day, I feel like I am actually going to be able to like guidance them. So I really enjoyed the middle level. I love all my classes. I just got switched to PE, which has been really interesting because they are all over the place, but it's really fun to see them in like a different environment. And so today I chose the literature review. It's called Labeling is Not the Issue, the Benefits of Labeling Children with Learning Disabilities when Response to Intervention is Implemented. And I chose this because I haven't been exposed to like children with learning disabilities or really anyone. And so I didn't know anything about this, but like after reading this article and then, I mean, I still have my questions about whether labeling a student with learning disability is good, okay, but this article helped me have more positives and negatives because I'm seeing like at that school, every single child has a learning disability. And so seeing that and how like the teachers work with them and how their like RCIs are implemented, it shows to me that like the labeling is working. And so that's why I chose this article. And I didn't know if any of you guys had any thoughts about this before I started. We're gonna play computers. So if you have like a phone or a computer or whatever, I'll pull it up and then we'll just talk about each question as we go. I didn't know if anyone had any starting opinions about it. If not, we can just go ahead.
I just love it. The same thing you said, it's always so confusing because there is this movement in psychology that's like, we shouldn't label people at all, right? And I get that, but your article really pointed out again why labeling is important in our current climate, right? Like you can't get an IEP, you can't get a whole bunch of things if you don't have a label.
Yeah.
And it's really similar for things like, you know, depression, right? It's like, okay, some people are, well, we should just treat the symptoms. Okay, but then like their insurance is gonna be covered if we don't put a label on there, right? Or, you know, I hate gender dysphoria as a diagnosis. But trans activists that I've talked to are like, no, we need it, because that's how we get insurance to like pay for our surgery and things like that. I mean, when they will. So, yeah, it's sort of this like catch-22 where it'd be so much better if we didn't have to use labels, but given our current environment, they open a lot of doors. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
At my like influence VA, I had like kind of looked up into like mental disabilities and she like stopped me right away. She's like, not mental disability, but learning disability. So I think it's like that kind of showed me it's also like just being careful about how you like use the labeling, you use it the right way.
And I feel like with our kind of generation, it's been different. Like we grew up like no phones. We weren't like educated like the children are these days learning. So like we might have used that or like the R word for like, and I hate that word, but some people just aren't exposed and don't know that it's not a right term to use. So like same thing. It's just we have to learn, and I think exposure is the best way. So. Awesome. Okay, I'll start with Kahoot. You guys can partner up Kahoot and then the number will come up over here. I'll have to move.
Probably this.
Awesome.
Go ball I know it's tempting.
Oh, the lovely song. Also, I chose this because our kids play Kahoot all the time, and so I just think it's a fun way to talk about the article. They also play this game called Blook It. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that. And it's like Kahoot, but it's hard. Like I tried to make one last night, and it's like a game to where you're all like going against each other and you're stealing each other's money. And so I felt like that was a very good way to like learn about the article. So.
Yeah, actually, forget his last name, but Jesse, who was one of the science teachers, he did his master's thesis on using the another term.
Yeah.
in the classroom.
The repetition I feel is very beneficial, especially for them, because it's like fun and they look forward to doing it. And so they're exposed to all the material they need to learn. They also don't do tests there. They only do quizzes. They only label it as a quiz. They don't label it as like a test or an exam. Because I think that takes away some pressure. Because I've seen in class, they're always asking like, are we gonna take a test? And are we ever gonna have an end of year exam? And the teachers are like, no, it's just quizzes to see your progress. So I think that's also cool. So I don't have to stress about like a collective end of year test or anything. Is that everyone? Yeah. Okay. No, that's not everyone. Is that everyone? I can't do math.
There's a couple people who are in, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody who wants to get in?
Yeah.
Get in, and if you want to just observe, that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Is this blocking it? What am I doing wrong here? I hosted this yesterday, but I don't even know how to start it.
Right underneath there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This was blocking it. Haha. Okay.
Everything blocks everything when you're in Zoom. I am very familiar.
Okay, the first question says, why is labeling someone with learning disability important? Is it because it serves as a focus for advocacy and for ensuring attention to the problem, or that these students can now focus better in school? So like the whole literature review is just giving points on this, and then throughout the review I'll give even more points, but yeah, it just mainly serves as a focus for advocacy and ensuring attention to the problem of the student. And then, okay, true or false? The learning disabled label allows educators to give extra support to students through IEPs offering learning support. Yay, true. Okay, so an IEP is an individual education plan. And so at Chesapeake Bay, they really encourage every single student get an IEP every single year. And so we're fortunate enough, if we want to go down and read those files, and the pages are like, it's like 100 pages. But yeah, they implement this to make sure they're progressing in what their strategies are using. And so IEPs allow students to receive instruction at their current level of functioning. So say they're supposed to be in 8th grade, but they're functioning at the 6th grade level. So they try and receive instruction for where they're at. And they use this using their accommodations to create specific goals and objectives from labeling them as learning disabled. What should teachers do to accommodate a student with learning disability? Teachers should ask every student what they need during class, or teachers must observe so they can respond and maximize their strength. So the right answer was teachers must observe so they can respond and maximize their strengths. Not saying this one's like wrong, but it's hard for a teacher to address every single student, every single class. And in the paper, it found research that when teachers observed and listened to a children's thinking patterns, the students with learning disabilities use the strategies given to solve various other problems. So this proves that labeling and then giving students an IEP works not just in school, but with their everyday lives. So a lot of the children at Chesapeake Bay also go to a therapist. And so we always try and like, if a student had a problem that day and I addressed it to our supervisor or the school guidance counselor, she'll say, okay, so this is what the therapist wants them to do in this situation. So then try and implement it. So we have to observe and listen and see what the child's issue is, and then we can address it after that. What is the proper way to label a student with a learning disability? By describing them as a disabled or handicapped person, or by using a term called person first language, for example, people with disabilities? Yay, we kind of just talked about that, but so when we do label a student with a learning disability, it is important that we emphasize the importance of seeing the child as a whole and not just their label. So person first labeling focuses away from the label, where it becomes less an emphasis when identifying a child. And like, for example, I don't know if you guys ever had this in your like middle school or elementary school, but it was like the AIG program. And we had it, but it was basically, it's called academically and intelligently gifted. So they're labeling children as gifted, but then people are opposed to labeling a child with learning disability when you're giving them, like, it shouldn't matter if the child is high or low and they're like texting or anything. If we're labeling children as gifted, why can't we label children with a learning disability to actually improve their education? So I think that.
Well, it's so interesting. I hadn't heard this term before until Dr. Jankowski, the head of school, said it. Like, there are some kids they have that they call choice exceptional, or they have an LD, but they also qualify as gifted. Right. So there are people who are both. So that's the other reason why it's important. The other thing I would say about this, really interesting. So one of the things I did during 2020, when I realized how much white privilege I had, how much able-bodied privilege, et cetera, I had, but I started following accounts of people different than me, and so I follow a lot of people in the disability rights era. And so, like, for kids, this may not matter as much, but for adults, a lot of what people are saying is like, ask the person.
Right.
Because some people prefer to be called like an autistic person, right, rather than like a person with autism. So like, just like anything else, asking them is really, and again, that's something I wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
Has anybody in here seen Teen Mom 2? So, it originally featured 14 moms and now there's 5. But one of the teen moms on there, her name's Mia, and she has 2 twin girls, Allie and Leah. And her daughter Allie was actually diagnosed with type 2 myotonic muscular dystrophy.
Okay.
So at the time, she was one of only 20 other kids in the world that had that.
Wow.
So her like having that label,
Yeah.
and being able to like get an IMP, especially with school, helped out with like a lot of stuff financially for her.
Right,
family.
right.
Like she had to get a wheelchair, she had to have an aid, so it was just really beneficial for life in general, and for like a lot
Right.
of other kids.
Yeah. Cause she could have gone her whole life and not known. She could have just said, I'm disabled. And then, but yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, another thing I'll say with this is, you know. The medical profession and psychological profession is always trying to like do better, right? And like be more inclusive with labels and things like that. But when they change stuff, for all these reasons, it can be a headache,
Yeah.
right? So like. When they brought the DSM-5 out in 2013, they did away with the label Asperger's syndrome. It's now just like under autism spectrum disorder. And my husband's best man, so his best friend from college. He works with kids with autism, and they had to re-diagnose every child, like retest them, because otherwise they couldn't keep getting services, because now that they had like doesn't exist.
Oh,
And so like that could be a headache
Yeah.
sometimes too.
Interesting. I had a friend in high school who was labeled that had Asperger's, and he still identifies as that. So it's
Yeah, a
interesting.
lot of people with Asperger's like that label
Right.
there, so yeah, that's again, we're like asking the person what they got working for.
Awesome. Okay. You said that was Teen Mom.
Mhm.
Okay. I couldn't remember if that's what you said.
I'll try to look that up.
Yeah. Next question. Why should some people disagree with labeling a student with learning disability? Due to the negative stigmas from society surrounding disabilities, or because teachers do not want to accommodate their students with their. Now, when I had to come up with the second option, sometimes I couldn't think of anything. Yeah, due to the negative stigmas from society. So in the article, I like this article because it gave both sides not very extensively, but it gave enough to be like, okay, you might question the other side, right? But then they give even better points for labeling, but this opposition uses the labeling theory, so people who believe that you shouldn't label a child uses the labeling theory as their defense as to why we shouldn't label a child. The labeling theory is basically their argument is that labeling an individual as different can have a negative connotation and can hinder teachers, peers, and even oneself, such as like the student with the learning disability, their abilities to perform in class. And so I don't disagree with this. I think it's a like rightful opposition to labeling a child, because I know I have friends that, have ADHD and stuff, and they're always like, people could be like, why are you so hyper? Like, that's annoying. Or like, now that we're grown up, they're like, give me your Adderall or whatever. So like, there's still negative stigmas, but there's negative stigmas with everything. And I think it's more beneficial that you label a child to get the help that they need and not just say we should go away with it just because there are negative stigmas in the world. So.
And it's saying that makes me think of how like your generation and younger, I feel like y'all are really working to break those.
I agree.
stigmas. Like y'all are so much more open about labels and getting therapy and things like that, and I just like that just makes my heart.
Yeah.
We need that, right?
It's funny, I'm on like psychology TikTok or whatever. And I see a lot of like grown-ups and they're just now getting diagnosed with ADHD or other learning disabilities. And it's like, it makes everything like, it's like a puzzle, like makes sense in their life, because now that they are diagnosed, because back then it was just like, you're just a child who's loud and can't sit down. And so I think it's important even for adults to be like, hey, I've had these things, is this what it is? Because now they're educated on it. But did you have anything, or you just?
I was gonna say that, when I was growing up, I remember I still had a lot of, classmates and stuff, like in elementary and middle school, where we still had learning disability programs. And our school system was huge, so they had to fund those programs to be big,
Right.
but we still had a lot of students who were bullying and doing stuff.
Of course,
like that.
yeah.
But it was definitely like the generation that came after me that I started to see where it was starting to break that, because it changed from like people wanting to make fun of the kids on the short bus and stuff like that. Like those were definitely still prevalent.
Yeah, me too.
And then it was crazy to me because you saw this switch. And to me, it was like kind of like whiplash, because in high school, these same kids turned around and were like trying to become advocates for these programs. And it really pissed me off because like I saw that and I was like, wow, like, I don't know, I just thought that was crazy, but it was very interesting to see like the younger kids after that were like, no, F that, we're not gonna do that.
Right.
And it was like more embracing it. So I thought that was good.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this school is so awesome over here. I can't like praise it enough, because it's seeing all these students, not that there's a lot, there's like 40 maybe in my middle level, but like all these students they aren't, labeled as like normal, and to see all of them, I haven't seen bullying personally. I don't know if y'all have. I mean, I've seen kids pick on each other, but I mean, you're gonna have that. They're like 10, but it's just seeing like no bullying. They're all embracing everyone's disabilities. Like if the kid has higher autism and then the kid has ADHD, they're not like, I don't know. It's just so different. And I think my roommate is doing her practicum hours at a public school. And her experience is totally different, because in public schools, they don't have this accommodation at all. So that's why I think Chesapeake Bay is just amazing. But yeah, I think it is changing. It's just, I mean, kids are gonna be kids, but I like Chesapeake Bay. It does exactly what it needs to do. Okay, number 6. What is the model waiting for students to fail? Is this when students must be 2 grade levels behind their peers to be labeled with learning disorder, or a student has a learning disability that's 2 grade levels below their peers? Nice. So the IQ achievement model is what a student has to take to be considered as a student or a person with a learning disability. And so a flaw in this model is that you have to be 2 grade levels below your peers to even be considered to be labeled with a learning disability. And I think that is unfortunate in some cases because say a student is in 5th grade, but they're at a 3rd grade level, so they're about to go to middle school. And then they're just now being diagnosed with a learning disability, and so they're already behind. And this can put them behind even more. So I think the IQ model, it's also going away because now we have the RTI model, which we'll talk about and which the article really goes into.
This actually reminds me quite a bit of interesting, like, tidbit of Virginia Wesleyan history. When I first got here, there was this rule in place that you couldn't like be put on probation or suspended or kind of even warned about your grades until you've been here for 3 semesters. And so like people would be failing through 3 semesters and like not get any like active feedback. And our BPA at the time, luckily was like, we need to change this because we need to intervene a lot earlier. So we got more philosophy.
You would think, I mean, at first you'd be like, okay, money wise, but then you would think you would want your, what is it, graduation rate or percentage to
Exactly.
be, or like your dropout rate to be low.
Yep.
So
I
that's
think
really,
that's where the philosophy has changed, but
Yeah.
it's like now we're really about like retention and supporting y'all, and that's why they keep. I really love that they're putting more research into like advising and the learning center and things like that, because. I mean, not only have y'all had to struggle through college with COVID, but like the first years coming in, some of them like did 2 years of high school on Zoom, right? So it's like a totally different experience. Yeah.
but yeah, waiting for students to fail. What an awful like nickname for this. Okay, true or false? The IQ achievement model may be mislabeling students without learning disabilities. Okay, so yeah, another downfall of the IQ achievement model is that some people jump the gun and try and give a student a learning disability when in actuality, they're 6 years old and they have a really hard time with instructions or meeting learning needs like the curriculum. And so sometimes you do have to give a child a chance and not just jump on labeling them, which is sometimes what the IQ achievement model would allow a teacher to do. The response to intervention approach is when students get research proven remediation and documentation of effectiveness, or students tell their teachers when they need remediation. Oh, so smart. So yeah, and another acronym for this is the RTI, and so we'll I'll be using that for now, but it means the response to intervention approach. And so yeah, when students get research proven remediation, which that's the difference between the IQ achievement model, is that this is research proven and then documentation of effectiveness, so they follow the child's progress. So the RTI approach proves high quality instruction based on the response to the interventions being implemented. And then more students are successful when using this approach, and more students leave the special needs program once they become older because of their progress in the RTI approach. True or false? RTI can be hard to implement due to the lack of resources and teachers' resistance to change. Yeah, so this is unfortunately true. With RTI, students and teachers and administrators and parents have to adapt to this like new behavior and program that the student is being put in, which can be challenging at times. I think teachers sometimes, again, resistance to change. I know like in public schools with my roommate, again, she's a special needs major. And so the way the public schools work now, she goes into all of the other classrooms. So like all of the students with learning disabilities are also implemented in the normal classroom, which I think is nice. And so she stays in there and she addresses them if they have questions or helps them catch up and things. But I think sometimes her like CT, so like her supervisor she's with and the teacher she's with, they sometimes don't give her enough information about like what they're presenting, and so she has a hard time helping the children. So I think it's a balance between the teachers who teach the other kids and the teachers who teach special needs kids. So I think resistance to change is one of the bigger problems. And then in the article, it also said that students of color, specifically African Americans and Latinos, are already labeled as ignorant or lazy or whatever other negative stigmas you want to think of. And so this also motivates the teacher to implement the RTI approaches less because they already have like less faith in the child, unfortunately. True or false? Only children with learning disabilities can have poor self-perceptions based on their academic or social competence. Yay, false. So this is again is proving why labeling isn't just affecting children that have poor self-perception. A child's awareness of their learning differences does not necessarily mean that the label is what caused the student's low self-perception. We can either, this was a quote from the article by Kaufman. He says, "We can either label something or not talk about it. We cannot talk about it without labeling it. This is not because someone wants it to be that way. It is just the way things are, the way language works." So if we don't establish there's a problem, how do we address it, sort of thing. And last question. What is the first step when using the RTI approach? Develop and implement a plan, define and analyze. I don't even know what that says. The needs of students, and then evaluate the response to the intervention. Yep. So first you'll define and analyze the needs of the students. Then you'll develop and implement a plan. And then lastly, you'll evaluate the response to the intervention. And again, the collaboration between general and special educators to work together using the RTI approach can help a student learn strategies for their learning disability by using these steps for the RTI approach. So that is everything I had for this Kahoot. I hope you guys learned some. This was just a summary of the whole article. I didn't want to just sit here and ask questions. I feel like this was a lot more fun. But podium, dun, 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 dun. These kids go crazy when this comes up. Yay, good job. Bashia. You guys are awesome. All right, so now we're gonna watch a video called "Stop Giving Children Labels." So we're gonna watch in opposition to everything we just learned.
So many children are labeled these days. There seems to be a big push to give a label for every condition that a child has. Now, whether or not your child's got a label is, I just want to share with you some thoughts. I used to be tolerant of labels. I thought that they were really helpful. And of course, sometimes they are. Sometimes if your child needs help, they only get help if they've got a label that's diagnosed a condition. But the more research I've done, the more I've talked to thousands and thousands of mums and dads and kids, the more I realize that labeling generally gets applied far too early. There's far too big a rush to get a label, because a label does some bad things as well. A label reduces expectations of a child. A label sometimes writes a child off so that no one expects them to do anything other than just the least amount in their schoolwork. And that's sad, because very often those children that have been labelled, A, they're very bright underneath, but you can't see it yet. But secondly, the limitation that's giving them the symptoms they have now is not a permanent condition. It's a limitation that can often be dealt with, often be removed. So how crazy is it, how unfair is it to give a label to a child that's a permanent label that will mark them, influence themselves and influence those around them for the whole of their lives, when in actual fact the condition they're suffering from is only a temporary one. It's the one that can be helped. So I believe the whole process of labeling should be absolutely rethought, and no one should be allowed to diagnose a child and give them a label until they're absolutely certain that the symptoms that they're suffering from now are symptoms that absolutely cannot be taken away in the future by some form of intervention. So if it's not permanent and you're absolutely sure, and unless you're absolutely sure that it is permanent, don't give them a label, please. People are going to stop expecting of them. They're going to stop expecting of themselves. And you know what? Very often it's the children that have been given a label that have the brightest intellect underneath, because very often that bright intellect gives them a fire hydrant of ideas that requires a lot of neurological development to cope with. So these are the children that go into overload, that will show poor focus, that will show a poor control of their impulsivity, or might show as poor reading difficulties, or poor physical coordination, or poor social skills. Often these are the skills, these are the children that have got brilliance hidden there waiting to be discovered. What I want the whole education industry to focus on is, let's find their potential. Let's check out whether something can be done that's transformational to the symptoms they've currently got. So if you've got a child that's got a label, please rethink whether you want them to stick with that label, or whether you're actually going to show all your initiative and all your effort to become a warrior mum and find a solution to that challenge that they've got and help them get beyond it. All the best.
I thank you for watching this video. Please do share it with anyone else that you know that could benefit from it. There's loads.
So does anyone have an opinion about this video and his take on labeling a child with learning?
I think he has a point, but at the same time, I think the positives outweigh the negatives.
I agree. I chose this video because it did make me go, what? You know, maybe, because again, I know so many of my friends and they did get bullied and they did have stereotypes and stigmas surrounding them. And so I don't think he's wrong in a sense. I just think that, again, to help a problem, we have to figure out what it is first and label it. So it's like he kind of is contradicting himself, saying, well, you have to use intervention because if you don't, or if you use intervention and it still doesn't work, then that's when you can label him. But how are you supposed to use the intervention and know what you're doing if you don't give them the label? So, bless you. So, yeah, it was actually really hard to find videos. I wanted to show a positive video and show reasons why you should label your child, but I couldn't really find any. There really wasn't any. If they were, there were other students in like college making them. And so every single time I looked up labeling a child, everything was negative. It was moms giving testimonies of their children. It was people like him, other professors showing why we shouldn't label a child. But then I looked at the dates and it was like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So there wasn't any recent negatives, like as much negatives about it. So I chose this one, which I think was a little more recent. Nope, 4 years ago. So yeah, I don't know. It was just really hard to find any positive. So I wanted to just end it on, you know, contradicting what we just learned and see if you guys had any thoughts about doing the opposite. Like if you had to put yourself in the slot of being a parent of a child with a learning disability, would you want them to be labeled to get them the proper help they needed. I don't know. It's something to think about. And so I think for us, it's kind of hard because we're not parents, or I don't think anyone except Mark is a parent. So like, how would you feel it?
Yeah, this is a really good another question. So we haven't had anything in terms of like learning disability with my kiddo, but she did have a speech delay because of the pandemic. She had what they call a pragmatic speech delay, which basically meant she had great vocabulary, she could like engage with books, but she couldn't hold a conversation with the classmate. And so her teacher and the head of school sat down with us and shared what they were concerned about. We went to her pediatrician, we got a referral to a speech therapist, also got tubes in her ears, which we think maybe she couldn't hear as well. And I was so glad, and like, I'm still so grateful to her school for like reaching out to us and saying, because it was night and day, it was like all the little language centers in her brain turned on. It's like, I've only seen that one other time in her development, and that's when really interesting, so I was trying to do baby signs with her, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
And she like kind of got it, and then when she started saying words again, it was like her little speech center turned on and she started signing while she was doing the words, which was cool. So yeah, I was very grateful that they said there was a problem, that we were able to get a label, so like our insurance paid for everything, all the speech therapy, the assessment, everything was very great. We actually have really good benefits here at Lakeland, so I'm proud for that, so yeah, I would want the label, so
Yeah.
again, like. I think people like this person, and I've seen people like him at conferences, they have a beautiful idea, right?
Right.
But we need to be realistic and we need to work within the system we have, and if the current system we have says. You need a label in order for, you know, remediation, treatment, support. Let's stick a label on it, right?
Yeah, we're not living in like a utopia where
Right, exactly.
like we have to be realistic when it comes to these things. And I think it is also parents, like I know a set of parents whose child got diagnosed with a spectrum of autism, but is very, very high functioning. So, and they're like scared because their child is getting that label so young. But it's like, if you don't address it, then how do you help your child? So I don't know, I, like Caitlin said, like, I'm not disregarding what he's saying, I'm taking it with a grain of salt and then using like rational logic of like how we could help a student. But again, I'm not someone with a learning disability, I'm not a parent with a child with a learning disability, so I can't say firsthand that this is wrong, but reading this article and like looking at the research, I would want my child to be labeled. And I think children should be labeled working at Chesapeake Bay.
I think it's interesting how you said like you're giving them like labels for something that like may not last forever, but like labels don't have to be permanent.
Right.
So kind of like contradicting.
Right, that's kind of the point of like RTI approach, is to help them get to a point in life or education where they don't have to have that label. And so I think I see a lot of kids at Chesapeake Bay, and I don't know why this would be so strange to say, but like I have a feeling that they will, it's not you're growing out of it, but I see them progressing so much and this working for them so much, even the time I've been there, and be like, okay, I think they will be able to go transition back to a public school and be perfectly fine, because a lot of the students at Chesapeake Bay have experienced a public school before and or went to a different school like Chesapeake Bay. And so they've had that experience, and I see that they probably like this way more just based on like talking to them. And a lot of the students, or like some of the students, are military brats. And so a lot of them have moved around a lot. And so like one of the students lived in Hawaii, this other student lived in London, and then someone's been all around the US. And so they've been to other schools. And so I think that's also challenging for them though, to find schools that are like Chesapeake Bay where they're from. And I know some of the kids travel an hour and a half every single morning to go to this school. And I was talking to my parents about it, and they were like, oh my God, he's African American. So he was like, how many students of color are there? And I think there's like 3. There's 2 Black students and some Latino students. And so that's also a challenge because Chesapeake Bay is expensive. And so I think it's harder for people of color to get in. And also they do not take any child with an extreme behavior issue. They, like, you can have a behavior issue with your learning disability, but it can't be to a point where it's like fighting or such. And so I think unfortunately, most like students of color with learning disabilities have behavior issues. And so since they don't have the funding and since they have behavior issues, they can't get into schools like Chesapeake Bay. And that's unfortunate, but hopefully I'll have to do more research, but hopefully there are schools that have that for them. But yeah, I mean, we're in a predominantly, or we're like in a half and a half society, and it's just unfortunate to not see a lot of students of color at Chesapeake Bay. And not that they don't want that, it's just, it's expensive.
Yeah,
And-
one of the reasons why they do like a lot of fundraising throughout the year, but obviously, like as you're seeing, that only goes so far.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I'd have the same thing, I'd have to look into the research, but I wonder how much students of color are just more likely to be labeled with behavioral issues,
Right.
whether or not they actually have.
Right. Again, so it's like labeling is good and bad, it's like give and take, and then at Chesapeake Bay, you have to, so Chesapeake Bay goes by Virginia State's like curriculum once you get into high school, so it's like the same thing in regular public schools. So there's a student and he's classified as 8th grade, but his learning level is not there. And so you have to test and see if you can go to Chesapeake Bay's high school, and he did not test. And so he's not able to go to the next level, which is like a very sad thing because he has autism. And so when he's in public schools at the special education programs, it's like he's just being babysat. They're not accommodating for what he needs. He's not learning. They're not paying attention to him, like observing, like it said in the article. And so his family's pressuring, this situation is very odd because his parents are pressuring him to be like, okay, you have to do good now, like you have to do better, you have to test, you have to be involved, you have to socialize with all the kids, but he's already tested to where he can't meet it, so his parents are putting a lot of pressure on him. So in classes, he's even more stressed, and he screams more and he's moving more because he's so stressed of the stress his parents are putting on him, which is really sad because he just can't test up. He's just not able to think on his own and do work on his own. And so he'll have to go back to a public school. And I just hate that for him. And Chesapeake Bay hates that. It's just you have to follow, because of high school is a normal high school for them. And meaning like testing and stuff. So I didn't know that until like last week, that high school was the curriculum of Virginia State. So I thought that was unfortunate, but at least I had the experience of a year to hopefully use those strategies and things to bring to public schools. But that is all I had for today for labeling. Thank you.
Awesome, and so I think Hannah is going next week, and then I believe we'll have our first discussion board one. So as soon as Julia has stuff posted, I will share that with y'all, and it'll be on Blackboard. I'll also go ahead and in the same area post these videos just in case anybody else wants to go back and review them. Excellent job.